On the 17th of December, Joachim woke first. He opened the Advent calendar to find a picture of the whole of the long procession of pilgrims on their way down a steep mountainside. As soon as he unfolded the little piece of paper, Papa came in. "You haven't opened it already, have you?" he said. "You might have waited for us." He hurried into the bedroom and hauled Mama out of the bed. She wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom first. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and bent over the piece of paper. It was Papa's turn to read. It was the end of the 6th century. Across the Macedonian chain of mountains sped a long procession of pilgrims. Down on the bank of the river Axios, a sheep farmer raised his eyes to the mountains and saw 7 sheep rolling down the mountainside like a pearl necklace. Around them fluttered a white bird. Behind the sheep came 4 men, one of them holding a shepherd's crook. Behind the 4 shepherds came even more people. The amazing sight lasted only for a second or two, then it was gone. The Greek sheep farmer stood rubbing his eyes, but then remembered that his father had told him once of a similar vision many years ago, when he saw a mysterious company escorted by 2 angels. Long after the vision of pilgrims' procession had gone, the sheep farmer realised that the white bird had not been a bird after all. He too had seen one of the angels of the Lord. The pilgrims followed the river down to where it ran out into the Thermatic Gulf in the Aegean Sea. Elizabeth had never seen such blue water. Etherio pointed up a mountain peak far away to the right of the gulf they were gazing at. "That's the peak of Mount Olympus. In the old days, the Greeks believed the gods lived there. They were called Zeus and Apollo, Athene and Aphrodite. But now Angel Time tells us that 569 years have passed since the birth of Jesus, and there is no one who believes in the Greek gods anymore." "Do they believe in Jesus?" asked Elizabeth. The angel nodded. "But it's only a few years since the church closed the ancient school of philosophy in Athens. That was founded almost 1,000 years ago by a famous philosopher called Plato." "Why did they have to close the old school?" Etherio said something that Elizabeth hid in her heart. "Many things have been done in the name of Jesus that heaven is not very happy about. Jesus wanted to talk to everyone. He never asked them to keep silent. Only a few years later, Paul came to Athens. He was the first great missionary for Christendom, and when he arrived in Athens, he wanted to talk to the Greek philosophers. He asked them to listen to the words of the Lord, but he wanted to hear what they thought as well. He couldn't say any more because Joshua struck the ground with his shepherd's crook and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." After a while, they came to a city which stood at the innermost point of the gulf. Etherio said that the time was 551, and the city was called Thessalonica, and that the Romans had made it the capital of Macedonia. As early as 50 years after the birth of Jesus, Paul established a Christian community here, and we're still a long way from the Holy Land. Paul wrote 2 letters to the Christians in this city. We can read them to this day, for both those letters are in the Bible. Elizabeth thought about the angel words. She would not have believed it possible to keep a few letters so long. They entered the city by the town gate. It was early in the morning, and hardly a soul was to be seen in the streets. Etherio pointed to the many churches and said that some of them were already several hundred years old. He stopped beside one of them and said, 1,500 years will pass, and this church of St. George will still be standing here. Then he sped further east to another city. "This is Philippi," said Etherio. Here Paul made his first speech on European soil and established the first Christian community in Europe. In the Bible there is a letter he wrote to the Philippians when he was imprisoned for the sake of his faith. Etherio pointed to the octagonal church. All of a sudden, one of the doors was open from the inside. Etherio already started to say, "Fear not," when a new angel strode out of the octagonal church. He took a few steps toward Elizabeth and said, "Greetings, my daughter. I am Sir Raphael, and I am coming with you to Bethlehem in order to ride on the cloud of heaven and welcome the Christ child into the world." Joshua struck his shepherd's crook against the church wall. "To Bethlehem! To Bethlehem!" They set off along the old road between the Ionian Sea and Constantinople. Sir Raphael told them that the road was called the Via Egnatia. As they ran, the angel Ethereal said, "The time is 511 years after Christ. We shall be in Constantinople before it's 500. Papa leafed through the atlas to see which way the pilgrims had gone. Here's the Macedonian mountain chain. Then they came down to the river Axius, that's here. And then this is the Thematic Gulf. When they're standing here, they can see Mount Olympus on their right. That's correct. Yes, it all tallies." He opened the second atlas, the one that showed how the countries of Europe had looked in the 6th century. "The Via Egnatia must have been this road," he said. "Here you see Thessalonica and Philippi." "Isn't there a map of Paul's missionary journeys?" Mama wanted to know. Papa turned the pages in the atlas over and over again. Joachim thought the way it showed how the world had looked in every age was like magic. It even showed cities that had long ago been buried in earth and sand. "Here it is!" exclaimed Papa. He had found the map that showed Paul's 4 great missionary journeys. Paul visited Philippi and Thessalonica on his 2nd missionary journey. When Joachim came home from school, the telephone was ringing. He thought it was Mama or Papa, for they sometimes rang to tell him they would be coming home a little later or to say that he could find something to eat in the refrigerator. He hated that. He lifted the receiver. "Hello?" "It's John," came the answer. "Where have you been?" he asked. That was what Mama said when he'd been out with a friend and had come home late. "I'm out in the wilderness somewhere," replied John, "but we can meet again another time. I just wanted to hear how things are going with the magic advent calendar." "Fine," said Joachim. "It's almost like having a birthday every day, because now Mama and Papa are reading all the pieces of paper too. We do it together." "Is that so? It's still possible to read them, then?" Joachim didn't understand what he meant. "We read them every day." "Fine. Yes, that's fine. Where has the pilgrimage got to now?" "I think it's called Philippi," replied Joachim. "We've looked it up on a map." "That's good. That was really the point of it too. But Joachim." "Yes?" "What do you think the Greek sheep farmer thought when he saw the angel procession going down to the Axius Valley?" "He must have been very frightened," said Joachim. "Yes, you can say that again." "But there are lots of things Mama and Papa want to ask you about," continued Joachim. "Can you come to coffee with us?" John laughed. "It's not Christmas yet." "You can have coffee and cakes just the same. We've baked quite a lot already." He was suddenly afraid that John might stop talking, so he hurried to ask, "Are you sure the lady in the photo is called Elizabeth?" "I'm almost sure," said John. "If not, she's called Tebasili." Joachim thought of the strange advent calendar Quirinius had given Elizabeth, and of what John had said when they met by the garden gate. "Perhaps she's called both," he said. "Perhaps she's called Elizabeth Tebasili." There was a long silence. "Yes, maybe so. Maybe so, yes," said John at last. "Was she Norwegian?" "Both yes and no," said John. "She was from Palestine, from a little village near Bethlehem. She said she was a Palestinian refugee, but it seems she was born in Norway. The whole thing's so strange." "So then she ran to Bethlehem with Ethereal and the lamb?" asked Joachim. "It took his breath away." "How you ask?" said John. "But now I must hang up. We must learn to wait, you see, Joachim. Did you know that Advent means something that is to come?" And he put down the receiver. Joachim couldn't settle to anything at home until Mama and Papa arrived. He had to tell them about the phone call over and over again, for Papa wanted to be quite sure John hadn't said anything important that Joachim had forgotten. "Elizabeth, Debasili," he muttered. "There can't be anyone called that." But there was something else. Joachim knew that a refugee was someone who had to flee from her own country because of war and danger, but he didn't know that anyone had been forced to flee from Bethlehem. Papa had to look up the atlas again. He told Joachim that many people in the villages around Bethlehem had had to move out of their country because of war. Some of them had lost all their possessions and were in such difficulties that they were forced to live in refugee camps. "A good Samaritan should have come to help them," said Joachim. "Jesus wanted to teach people to help one another when any of them needed it. And then there would have been peace. For peace is the message of Christmas."